My friends, I welcome you not as an authority, but as a companion upon the inner road. For each of us must walk the labyrinths of our own psyche and confront the mystery that awaits us there. Today we shall speak of the empath, the one whose soul is woven of such subtle threads that it trembles with the faintest movement of another's heart. The empath is the vessel of collective feeling. He is porous, permeable, and therefore vulnerable to the unseen tides that move between human beings. Yet this sensitivity, this sacred wound of awareness, contains within it the seed of transformation. When the empath sets boundaries, not as walls of defense, but as circles of consciousness, the very field of psychic energy shifts. This shift is not symbolic, it is immediate and real. For psyche and matter are not divided. Energy obeys the law of consciousness. And where awareness defines a limit, the unconscious rearranges itself accordingly. We must begin, as always, with the paradox. To feel deeply is to risk dissolution, but to close oneself is to suffocate the soul. The empath lives suspended between these poles, the yearning for unity and the terror of absorption. Many such souls find themselves lost in the emotions of others, unable to distinguish where their own currents end and another's begin. They become mirrors, reflecting every sorrow, every unspoken tension, until they forget the original image that once belonged to them. And yet, this very capacity for communion is a gift of the self, manifestation of eros, the connecting principle of the psyche. Without it, no true relationship could exist. But every archetype contains its shadow. The empath's light of compassion easily turns to the darkness of enmeshment, and the voice of the self is drowned by the chorus of alien desires. In the language of alchemy, such a state is the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of confusion and disintegration that precedes renewal. The empath, who has not yet discovered the power of boundary, remains trapped in this alchemical vessel, boiling with the projections of others. One feels heavy, invaded, exhausted, for psychic energy has been diverted from the inner work towards the maintenance of borrowed emotions. The unconscious then compensates. Dreams emerge of floods, of strangers entering one's home, of being consumed by shadowy crowds. These are not random fancies of the sleeping mind, but precise symbolic communications from the depths, urging the individual to reclaim the lost center. A woman once came to me, pale and trembling, saying she could no longer enter a room without absorbing the pain of those around her. She felt every sorrow as her own, every unspoken conflict as a pressure in her chest. I cannot breathe in the world, she said. In her dreams, she wandered through an endless house, each door opening into another person's life, until she reached a room with no walls, a vast, open space where the wind itself wept. There, she said, I disappear. It was clear that her anima, the inner feminine soul force, had expanded beyond its proper bounds, attempting to encompass the whole of humanity, her compassion had become inflation, the unconscious identification with the divine archetype of the healer. To be Christ-like is not to dissolve into the collective pain, but to hold it within the container of the self. The boundary, then, is not the denial of empathy, but its transformation into conscious service. When she began to visualize her own psychic space, a circle of light surrounding her body, something remarkable occurred. She felt, for the first time, the subtle pulse of her own energy distinct from the field around her. Within weeks, her dreams shifted. The house gained walls. The weeping wind became a gentle breeze. You see, the psyche responds immediately to symbolic acts of self-definition. To say, this is mine and this is not mine, is to awaken the discriminating function of consciousness, the logos which orders chaos and creates form. When the empath asserts boundaries, he participates in the original act of creation. Just as God in Genesis separates light from darkness, so the empath, by drawing a sacred circle around his own being, brings cosmos out of psychic night. It is important to understand that energy follows attention. Wherever we direct our psychic gaze, the libido, the life energy, flows. The unbounded empath disperses this energy outward, diffusing it into countless emotional bonds. Each sympathetic identification becomes a thread tying the soul to external objects. When too many such threads exist, the individual's core becomes depleted. Setting boundaries gathers these scattered filaments back into the center, restoring vitality. The shift is instantaneous because the psyche is a living field of symbols. The moment one acts with awareness, the symbol changes its value and the energy reorganizes itself accordingly. This is why ritual, prayer, and intention have real psychological power. They operate through the language of the unconscious. But there is another dimension, the metaphysical resonance that accompanies psychic differentiation. When the empath defines the self, the collective unconscious registers this act as a movement of archetypal proportion. It is as though a new center of gravity has appeared within the field of humanity. The archetype of the boundaried soul, a relatively young archetype in the modern age, vibrates through the web of the collective, offering permission for others to do the same. Every conscious act of individuation ripples outward. Thus, when the empath reclaims his energy, the energy of the surrounding environment also shifts. People may sense the difference without understanding it. Some will be drawn closer, others will recoil. The dynamics of projection change, for the empath is no longer an unconscious mirror, but a luminous, self-contained vessel. We live in an era of psychic overexposure. The collective unconscious, once mediated by myth and ritual, now floods through the artificial networks of technology. The empath, already sensitive by nature, becomes overwhelmed by the unfiltered emotions of the world. Boundaries, then, are not merely psychological defenses. They are the last sanctuaries of the soul. To create an inner temple, one must be willing to say no, even to love, for love without form becomes possession. It devours both giver and receiver. True compassion requires the firmness of the serpent and the innocence of the dove, a paradox known to the ancient mystics. The empath must learn this paradox within their own blood. Let us consider the image of the mandala, which I have often described as the archetype of wholeness. The mandala is a circle containing a center, the symbol of the self surrounded by the ordered domains of consciousness. It arises spontaneously in dreams and visions whenever the psyche seeks integration. When the empath sets boundaries, he unconsciously draws a living mandala around his own being. The circle defines the sacred space within which transformation can occur. Outside the circle lies the world of others, the chaos of the collective. Inside, the alchemical work proceeds. Each time one reaffirms this boundary through meditation, reflection, or simple awareness, the mandala strengthens over time. It becomes not a defensive barrier, but a radiant field that transmits balanced energy rather than absorbing it. The shift, therefore, is from identification to participation. The immature empath identifies with others' emotions. The mature empath participates in them consciously, as one might participate in a ritual, fully present yet rooted in the self. This transformation is accompanied by a change in vibration, a new quality of energy that others feel instinctively. They sense the presence of someone who does not react but responds, who can contain both joy and suffering without becoming lost. Such a person becomes an anchor in the storm of collective emotion, a living symbol of integration. But this state is not achieved through will alone. It requires the descent into shadow. The shadow of the empath is resentment. Having given too much, one feels betrayed by the world, unseen, used. Beneath the gentleness lies suppressed rage, the fury of the soul that has been denied its boundaries. This rage is sacred. It is the raw force of individuation struggling to assert itself. To set boundaries is to honor this dark fire, to allow it to become conscious rather than destructive. Many fear that acknowledging such anger will make them selfish or cruel, but the opposite is true. Only when the instinctual energy of the shadow is integrated can compassion become authentic. Otherwise, it remains a mask worn to conceal the hunger for approval. When the empath says, "No more," with full awareness, the energy locked in the shadow returns as strength. The aura clears, the body breathes, the heart burns with a steady flame instead of flickering in every passing wind. If you listen carefully to your inner world, you may feel this shift the very moment you assert a boundary. It is subtle but undeniable, as though the air itself rearranges. The psyche, freed from confusion, exhales. The unconscious, which had been compensating for imbalance, ceases its protest. Dreams become quieter, the body lighter. Others may react. For every system resists, change Those who once fed unconsciously on your empathy may withdraw or become irritated, sensing that their familiar channels of projection have closed, but this is natural. In the cosmic dance of energy, each soul must learn to carry its own burden. To refuse to carry what is not yours is not cruelty. It is initiation. You are teaching the world through your own vibration what it means to be whole. And yet, let us not mistake boundaries for walls. The wall excludes, the circle includes by defining. In the ancient mystery schools, the initiate would draw a circle before invoking the divine, not to keep God out, but to make the space holy. Likewise, when the empath defines their boundaries, they are not rejecting others, but consecrating the self as a vessel of conscious love. Within the circle, love becomes luminous, not consuming. This is why when the empath finally stands in the center of their own mandala, the energy around them shifts instantly. The world recognizes the emergence of a centered soul. Such a being radiates peace, and peace, my friends, is contagious. You see, the psyche is not a machine but a living organism, and every organism obeys the law of equilibrium, where energy accumulates without consciousness. The unconscious compensates by producing symbols, fantasies, even physical symptoms. The empath, before setting boundaries, functions as a sponge for the collective unconscious. They attract the unresolved energies of others because they unconsciously mirror the world's longing to be healed. In this way, the empath becomes the modern mystic without temple, without priesthood, yet carrying within them the sacrificial altar of humanity. Their suffering is not meaningless, but neither is it to be glorified. It is the prelude to individuation, to the recognition that one cannot save the world by dissolving into it. When you absorb the pain of others, you enact the archetype of the wounded healer. It is a powerful image, Chiron, the immortal centaur, wounded by his own arrow, and yet the teacher of healing arts. But even Chiron, in the end, found peace only when he surrendered his immortality to reclaim rest. In psychological terms, this means that empathy must be balanced with mortality, with the acknowledgement of human limitation. You cannot feel everything and remain intact. You cannot be everyone's healer without first healing yourself. The unconscious demands sacrifice, but it must be the right sacrifice. What must die is not the heart's compassion, but the ego's illusion that to help is to absorb. Each of us carries within an image of the divine an archetype of wholeness, which I call the self. The empath, because of their porous nature, often feels the self of others as if it were their own. They intuit the unrealized potential in those around them and suffer when others fail to live up to it. Yet, this perception, noble as it may be, binds them in invisible chains. For the moment, we assume responsibility for another's soul. We rob them of their own initiation. Compassion without discernment becomes possession. It is a subtle form of spiritual inflation, for one imagines oneself indispensable to the salvation of others. But the unconscious will not tolerate such inflation. It will answer with dreams of collapse, of drowning, of losing one's identity in the vast sea of faces. The remedy is humility. Humility born of knowing that love, to be divine, must respect the autonomy of the other. Now, let us turn inward and observe the mechanics of this energy shift. Imagine your psyche as a vessel filled with luminous fluid, the libido, the life energy. When the vessel has cracks, unconscious openings created by trauma, by guilt, by the need to be loved, this fluid seeps out. Others, sensing the vitality that flows through you, instinctively drink from it. They do not do so maliciously. It is the unconscious law of psychic economy. Energy moves from areas of high potential to low. When the empath repairs these cracks, when they say no, when they refuse to absorb, the energy ceases to leak. It begins to circulate within the vessel, strengthening the aura. At that moment, the empath becomes radiant rather than receptive. This is the instant shift of energy I speak of. It is not metaphorical. It is experienced as an expansion of presence, a warmth in the solar plexus, a subtle hum in the air around you. Even the plants and animals may respond, for the psyche is not confined to the skull, it extends into the world. But beware, the first experience of this newfound autonomy can feel like isolation. Many report a strange emptiness when they withdraw their projections from others. The familiar pain of over-identification is gone, and in its place lies silence. The ego, accustomed to defining itself through service and empathy, cries out, "Who am I now that I no longer feel their suffering as my own?" This cry is the voice of the orphaned ego, suddenly separated from its unconscious mother, the collective. In alchemy, this stage is known as solutio, the dissolution preceding rebirth. If the empath endures this silence without rushing to fill it, something miraculous occurs. Out of the emptiness arises the self, the inner sun that had been eclipsed by the world's sorrows. The heart begins to beat with its own rhythm, and for the first time, love becomes choice, not compulsion. I have seen this process countless times in my patients. They come exhausted, radiant yet burnt, speaking of feeling too much, too deeply. When we begin the work of individuation, they fear that setting boundaries will make them cold, detached, unkind. Yet, as the process unfolds, they discover the opposite, that boundaries are the very condition for authentic warmth. Without them, love is diffuse and sentimental. With them, it is focused and transformative. Think of the sun. Its rays warm the earth because they are bound by gravity into a coherent sphere. Were it to lose that boundary, it would disperse into the void. So too, with the empathic soul, in dreams, the moment of setting a boundary often appears as the construction of a wall, a fence, or a circle of stones. But soon, these solid barriers evolve into living symbols. A garden surrounded by hedges, a temple protected by flame, or a ring of light around the dreamer's body. This evolution shows that the psyche understands boundaries not as imprisonment, but as sacred space. The unconscious always seeks image before concept. Thus, when you imagine yourself enclosed by a golden light, you are not indulging in fantasy. You are speaking the native tongue of the soul. Energy understands symbol more readily than logic. One act of vivid imagination can achieve what months of intellectual effort cannot: a reorganization of the psychic field. Let us descend deeper still. Beneath the empath's sensitivity lies the archetype of the divine child, the innocent awareness that experiences unity with all existence. In early life, before the ego differentiates, the child lives in participation, mystique, fused with the mother and the world. For some souls, especially those destined for spiritual work, this state lingers into adulthood. They remain attuned to the collective womb, feeling the joy and anguish of the world as though it were their own body. This is both a blessing and a danger. The task of maturation is to separate without severing, to establish the ego's independence while retaining the soul's openness. When the empath sets boundaries, they enact this very transition from mystical fusion to conscious union. It is the evolution of love from instinct to art, and yet the collective shadow resists this evolution. Society idealizes self-sacrifice. It calls it virtue to feel endlessly for others, even to the point of self-annihilation. But such morality, though cloaked in goodness, often serves the shadow's interest. A population trained to absorb pain without protest becomes easy to control. The empath who awakens threatens this order, for their energy no longer flows unconsciously into collective complexes. When one individual withdraws projection, the archetypal pattern loses power. Thus, the empath's boundary work is not merely personal, it is revolutionary. Each act of self-definition weakens the tyranny of collective possession. We see this clearly in history. Every spiritual reformer, from the Buddha to Christ, began by withdrawing from the crowd. They went into the desert, the forest, the mountain, not to abandon humanity, but to differentiate from it. Only after establishing their own center did they return, bearing the gift of conscious compassion. The desert, then, is a symbol of the psychic boundary, a space emptied of others, where the soul confronts itself. For the modern empath, such a desert may take the form of solitude, therapy, meditation, or even silence amid the noise of daily life. It is the sacred retreat in which the soul learns to stand upright. When you begin to practice this, you may notice a curious phenomenon. Certain people will test your boundaries. They will provoke guilt, appealing to the old archetype of the martyr that still lingers in your unconscious. This is the trickster's work. The shadow challenging the new structure of consciousness. But do not be deceived. Every test is an initiation. The psyche is proving your resolve, ensuring that your no comes from authenticity, not resentment. Once the test is passed, the energy once locked in guilt becomes available for creation. Many empaths find that as they set boundaries, their artistic or intellectual powers blossom, the libido, no longer leaking into others' pain, now seeks expression in beauty, insight, and love that uplifts without depleting. In this way, setting boundaries is a creative act. It is the birth of a new psychic configuration, a union of eros and logos, of feeling and form. The empath who masters this art becomes a bridge between worlds. They feel deeply, yet remain sovereign. They listen without losing themselves. Such a person embodies what I have called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites until a new synthesis emerges. In them, the collective finds healing not through absorption, but through resonance. Their presence harmonizes rather than mirrors. This is why the energy around them shifts so swiftly. They no longer react from compulsion, but vibrate from essence. Let me tell you a dream from one of my analyses, a dream that captures this transformation. A man dreamed he stood at the edge of a vast ocean, watching countless faces rise and fall in the waves. Each face cried for help. He waded in, trying to rescue them, but the tide pulled him under. Just as he began to drown, a voice from the sky said, "Build your island." Suddenly, the sea withdrew, revealing a small circle of dry land around him. The faces still floated beyond, but he could now stand firm and cast ropes to those ready to come ashore. The next morning, he awoke with tears and said, "For the first time, I feel I can help without dying." You see, the island was his boundary, his consciousness reclaimed from the collective sea. The empath's awakening always takes this form, the discovery of firm ground within the depths. To live this truth is to enter the path of the magician, not the conjurer of illusions, but the one who transforms energy through awareness. The true magician knows that power lies not in control, but in alignment. When you are centered, energy responds instantly to your intention. You speak, and the psyche obeys because you are speaking from the self, not from fear. The empath who sets boundaries becomes such a magician. They need not defend their space aggressively. Their mere clarity shapes reality. Others adjust unconsciously, for energy seeks coherence. This is the secret behind what many call vibration. It is not mysticism in the vulgar sense, but the natural law of psyche and matter, reflecting one another. Remember always, the unconscious respects authenticity. It does not care for moral appearances or social virtue. It obeys the truth of your being. If your boundary arises from love of self rather than fear of others, it will harmonize rather than divide. But if it is born of resentment or pride, it will harden into isolation. Therefore, every no must contain within it a deeper yes, yes to your own life, your rhythm, your destiny. When spoken from this place, even silence becomes a healing presence. You need not explain or justify. The field itself will communicate, and when that happens, when the empath finally inhabits the center of their own circle, the energy of the entire system reorganizes, relationships purify, coincidences align, the outer world mirrors the inner. This, my friends, is the alchemy of consciousness. When one speaks of boundaries, one must inevitably speak also of polarity, for all life is structured upon the tension of opposites. Without polarity, there is no movement. Without conflict, no consciousness in the psyche. This polarity manifests as the eternal dance between the masculine and the feminine, between logos and eros, between animus and anima. For the empath, this dance is particularly vivid because sensitivity magnifies the interplay of opposites within. When the empath learns to set boundaries, they are, in truth, initiating the sacred marriage of these two principles, for it is only through differentiation, through knowing what is mine and what is not mine, that the inner opposites can approach one another without confusion. In most empaths, eros dominatus, the feminine principle of connection and feeling reigns supreme, drawing the soul outward into the world's currents. This is the empath's strength and their peril. Without the balancing function of logos discrimination, reason, structure, eros dissolves into sentimentality, love becomes attachment, compassion becomes exhaustion. The empath gives endlessly because the inner masculine, the animus, has not yet learned to guard the threshold. Thus, setting boundaries is not a mere behavioral skill, but an archetypal activation. It is the moment when the animus awakens and takes its rightful place beside the anima, not as tyrant, but as protector of sacred space. Only then can the empath's love mature into wisdom. I have often said that every man carries within him an anima, and every woman an animus, but these are not gendered identities. They are psychic principles that belong to all. When an empath sets a boundary, regardless of their outer form, the inner masculine steps forward, not in aggression but in clarity. The sword appears, and with it, the ability to discern truth from illusion. This is why, in myth, the hero must wield a blade before approaching the dragon. The sword is consciousness, the power to name, to cut through the fog of projection. The empath who takes up this sword ceases to drown in the sea of others' emotions. They become capable of navigating it. The sword does not kill the dragon, it defines it. And once defined, the dragon reveals itself as guardian of treasure, not destroyer. You may have noticed that when you first begin to assert your boundaries, old wounds awaken, the voice of guilt, the fear of rejection, the echo of parental disapproval. All these arise as the inner feminine protests against the sudden firmness of logos. She whispers, if you separate, you will not be loved. This is the cry of the inner child who once equated love with merging. But if you endure this inner conflict, something marvelous unfolds. The anima herself begins to transform. She ceases to be the wounded child and becomes the wise guide, the Sophia, the soul, who knows that true union requires two distinct beings. When this happens, the empath no longer seeks salvation through others. They find it in the communion of their own opposites. The inner marriage, what the alchemists called the conjunctio, becomes the foundation of a new life. Let us pause to feel this mystery. Imagine, if you will, a circle within which two figures stand, the feminine, luminous and flowing, and the masculine, still and radiant. Between them burns a flame, not consuming, but harmonizing. That flame is consciousness born of tension. It is the living symbol of the self. Every act of setting a boundary is, in essence, an offering to that flame. The empath learns to say, I will not dissolve into you, for I honor the sacred space between us. And in that space, love becomes possible. It is no longer fusion, but communion, two flames dancing within one light. This integration of opposites brings an immediate change in vibration. The energy that once leaked through the unguarded borders of the psyche now rises through the central channel, illuminating the higher centers of awareness. Many describe sensations of warmth along the spine, or a sudden clarity in the mind, as if fog has lifted. These are not fantasies. They are psychophysical manifestations of the new order within. The psyche and the body are not two, they are reflections of one field. When the soul integrates its polarities, the body responds, becoming a vessel of harmony, thus setting boundaries, heals not only the mind but the entire organism. Yet we must be cautious. The integration of animus and anima is not achieved once and for all. It is a living process. At times, the animus may overassert himself, turning boundaries into fortresses. The empath may become cold, analytical, detached. At other times, the anima may reassert her dominance, dissolving the new structure in waves of feeling. Both movements are necessary. The psyche breathes in and out, oscillating between differentiation and union. The goal is not perfection, but balance the dynamic equilibrium of a river contained by its banks. The banks give form to the flow, and the flow gives life to the banks. When this balance is achieved, a new phenomenon emerges. The empath becomes a transmitter rather than an absorber of energy. Their field vibrates in coherence, and others unconsciously attune to it. It is as if a musical instrument has been tuned and the surrounding orchestra adjusts itself to the new pitch. People feel calmer in their presence. Conflicts resolve. Spaces become lighter. This is not magic in the vulgar sense. It is resonance. The human psyche, like all systems, seeks coherence. When you embody harmony, the world rearranges itself around you. Thus, when the empath sets boundaries, energy shifts instantly. not because you have forced it, but because you have become a tuning fork for order. There is a deeper layer, still, one that touches the realm of the mystical. In many traditions, the creation of the world begins with an act of self-limitation. In the Kabbalah, God withdraws his infinite light to make space for creation, a process called Tzimtzum. In the Tao, the one divides into yin and yang. In every myth of Genesis, the principle is the same. The infinite must contract to give birth to form. The empath, in setting boundaries, enacts this same divine pattern. They withdraw their boundless identification to allow individuality, theirs and others, to exist. The boundary is, therefore, an imitation of the divine act of creation. In psychological terms, it is the birth of the ego as servant of the self, not its enemy. The empath who understands this sees that limitation is sacred. To say no is to participate in God's original differentiation, and yet the world misunderstands. It praises endless giving, calls it love, and condemns boundaries as selfishness. But in truth, the selfless without self is hollow. Only the centered soul can offer authentic service. Consider the symbol of the chalice. It can hold the wine only because it has a rim. Without that rim, the essence would spill and be lost. Likewise, your soul's capacity to contain divine energy depends upon the integrity of its form. The empath's challenge, then, is not to abandon compassion, but to refine its vessel. The stronger the container, the purer the offering. This is why mystics throughout the ages withdrew into solitude, not to escape the world, but to strengthen the cup of their being so they could pour forth without depletion. Let us not forget the shadow, for it lurks even in the light of transformation. When the empath discovers power through boundaries, the temptation arises to wield it unconsciously. One may become rigid, dismissive, or prideful in newly found autonomy. The ego whispers, I am no longer weak, I am untouchable. But this, too, is inflation. The pendulum swinging from martyrdom to superiority. The true balance lies in humility, which is not weakness, but reverence for the vastness within and without. To remain humble is to remember that your energy is not yours alone. It flows from the same source that animates all beings. You are a steward of consciousness, not its master. Boundaries must serve love, not power. I recall a vision from one of my own active imaginations, a scene that revealed this truth. I found myself standing in a great temple carved of crystal. Around me stood figures of light and shadow, all watching silently. A voice said, "Here the empath learns the law of resonance." Before me appeared two chalices, one overflowing, the other dry. I reached to pour from the full into the empty, but the moment the liquid touched, it vanished. Then the voice said, "Only equal vessels can share." I understood then that true exchange requires equality of being. To give to one who has not yet awakened their own container is to pour essence into the void. This does not mean we refuse compassion. It means we discern where our energy is received consciously. Thus, the empath becomes not a savior, but a teacher, one who invites others to build their own cup. This discernment marks the emergence of spiritual maturity, no longer governed by guilt or the need to please. The empath acts from inner necessity. Their yes and no flow from the same root authenticity. Such a person may appear mysterious, even contradictory, gentle yet firm, compassionate yet detached. But this paradox is the very signature of wholeness. In alchemy, the final stage, the rubedo, is symbolized by the royal hermaphrodite, the union of male and female, spirit and matter, heaven and earth. The empath who has achieved this integration becomes such a being inwardly. They no longer oscillate between extremes. They radiate a golden stillness that embraces all opposites. And what of love, you may ask? Does not love transcend boundaries? I tell you, love is the boundary. It is the invisible rhythm that holds the universe together. When you love consciously, you are not dissolving into another. You are recognizing the divine pattern that links your center to theirs. The empath, once enslaved by feeling, now becomes love itself, not sentimental emotion, but the dynamic force that orders chaos. In this state, the individual no longer fears energy exchange, for they have become the source. Others' emotions may touch them, but cannot wound, for they flow through a heart that has learned transparency without leakage. The vessel is full, yet open, finite, yet infinite. Perhaps now you sense the paradox that lies at the core of all mysticism. The boundary is not the end of unity, but its precondition. Only the one who stands firmly within themselves can truly meet the other. The empath's boundary is not a wall, it is the circle of the mandala, the geometry of divine relationship. Within it, the world becomes luminous, each being seen as a reflection of the self. The energy that once scattered in all directions now radiates in harmony. This is why, my friends, when the empath sets boundaries, energy shifts instantly, because consciousness has re-entered the pattern of creation. The inner sun has risen, and the world responds. Now we come to the end, or rather, to the circle's completion. For in the language of the soul, there is no end, only return. The empath who has learned the art of boundary stands now upon the threshold of a greater mystery, the realization that the boundary itself is not the final goal, but the bridge to transcendence. For when form has been perfected, spirit descends. When the vessel is whole, grace enters. The energy that once flowed outward into chaos now turns inward, spiraling toward the center, where the self awaits not as an idea, but as living presence. In this moment, the empath experiences what mystics of all ages have called illumination. It is not ecstasy in the vulgar sense. It is a quiet, steady light an awareness without object. The ego, long accustomed to being the center, now feels itself rotating around a still greater sun. The self is that sun, timeless, radiant, impersonal, yet intimate. When you touch this center, the boundaries that once felt like barriers reveal their true nature. They were never meant to separate, but to define the sacred geometry through which the divine manifests. The shift is profound. What once was defense becomes devotion. To maintain your boundary is no longer an act of protection, but of reverence, reverence for the mystery of your own existence. You begin to sense that your life, your energy, even your pain are expressions of something vast and purposeful. The empath, once the wounded mirror of the world, becomes a clear lens through which the light of the self shines unobstructed. The energy no longer oscillates between taking and giving. It circulates in wholeness, flowing effortlessly through the field of being. In this state, relationships transform. You no longer approach others to rescue or to merge, but to participate in the divine interplay of consciousness. Each person becomes a mirror reflecting a facet of your own self, and yet their individuality remains sacred. You see the world as a mandala of souls, each with its own orbit, each contributing to the great pattern. The empathic gift, once a source of exhaustion, becomes an organ of vision. The ability to feel the unity behind diversity, to hear the heartbeat of God in every being, and because your boundary holds, this vision does not consume you, it nourishes you. You become both vessel and current, both the river and its banks. Do not imagine that such realization ends the human struggle. The shadow remains, though now it serves rather than sabotages. It whispers reminders of humility, of necessity, of limitation. Without shadow, light becomes sterile. Without body, a spirit loses meaning. The empath who has attained this depth of awareness must return to the world to live among men and women, to carry the radiance of the inner sun into the marketplaces of life. This return is the true test, for the temptation to retreat into spiritual isolation, to remain in the sanctified stillness, is strong, but individuation is not escape, it is incarnation. The soul descends again into matter, now illumined by consciousness, and each encounter becomes sacrament. When such a person speaks, their words carry resonance. When they act, their gestures align with unseen rhythms. Others sense in them a quiet authority, not born of domination but of presence. They do not impose boundaries. They are the boundary, the embodiment of clarity within chaos. Around them, energy harmonizes spontaneously, as though the world recognizes a familiar melody. The plants, the animals, even the air itself respond, for consciousness is contagious. This is not poetry, but the natural law of psyche. Order evokes order. Harmony evokes harmony. And yet, This serenity does not mean indifference. The awakened empath feels more deeply than ever, but now the feeling is luminous, not heavy. Compassion flows through them like light through crystal, pure, uncolored, ungrasping. They do not suffer with others. They suffer for them, which is to say, they allow divine compassion to move through their being without resistance. This is the true meaning of being a healer. Healing is not the removal of pain, but the illumination of meaning within it. The empath who has become whole no longer absorbs darkness. They reveal the light hidden within it. Perhaps you ask, how does one live in this state amid the noise of modern life? The endless tides of emotion, the chaos of the collective unconscious, now amplified by technology. The answer lies in rhythm. Every soul must learn its own rhythm, the pulse by which it breathes with the universe. Boundaries are the instrument through which this rhythm becomes audible. When you know your rhythm, you can enter the world without losing it. You can move among storms and remain centered. For you have discovered the axis around which all motion turns. The empath's sensitivity, once a curse, now becomes guidance. It tells them instantly when they are aligned and when they are not. Energy shifts instantly because consciousness responds. The moment you return to your rhythm, there is a beautiful image from alchemy that captures this final transformation. The lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone. It is described as both fixed and flowing, both solid and radiant. It symbolizes the union of opposites achieved within the vessel of the psyche. The empath who has integrated boundaries embodies this stone. Their presence crystallizes chaos into order, pain into wisdom, emotion into meaning. They do not cling to joy nor flee from sorrow, for they see both as movements of the same eternal energy. Such a soul is at peace not because the world has changed, but because they have become the still point within it. In the language of psychology, this is the realization of the self, but let us not reduce it to theory. It is a living experience. When it occurs, one feels as though standing at the center of an infinite sphere whose circumference is nowhere and whose center is everywhere. The distinction between inner and outer fades. The boundary becomes transparent. Yet, this transparency does not annihilate form, it perfects it. You remain, and yet you're also the world. You feel the pulse of the stars in your own blood. You see the divine play unfolding through every glance, every breath, every silence. This is not mysticism for the sake of escape. It is the most intimate realism, for reality itself is revealed as psyche, animated, ensouled, alive. At this level of awareness, even the language of energy shifts, changes. We no longer speak of protecting, absorbing, or releasing. We speak of attuning, harmonizing, witnessing. The empath ceases to manage energy and begins to be energy conscious, deliberate, serene. When anger approaches, it is felt, acknowledged, transmuted. When love arrives, it expands but does not overwhelm. Every emotion becomes a messenger. not a master. The psyche has become a temple, and within that temple, the priest and the God are one, but we must remember, this integration is not achieved once and for all. Life continues its cycles of expansion and contraction. The empath must renew their boundaries as one tends a sacred fire, not with fear, but with devotion. Each no is a log upon that fire, each yes a breath that sustains it. Over time, this rhythm becomes second nature. You no longer think about protecting your energy. You live as energy protected by awareness. The shift, again, is instantaneous, for time itself bends around consciousness. In this final stage, something extraordinary unfolds. Gratitude. The empath who once cursed their sensitivity now blesses it. They see that without it, they could never have known the depths of feeling, the mystery of interconnectedness, the wonder of transformation. The very wounds that once drained them have become portals to transcendence. Each pain was a teacher, each boundary a lesson in love. This is the secret wisdom of the heart. That suffering, when embraced consciously, becomes initiation. Through it, the soul remembers its divine origin. And so, when the empath sets boundaries, energy shifts, yes, but it does more. It awakens. The shift is not merely psychological, but ontological. It changes the fabric of being. The world that once mirrored your confusion now reflects your coherence. The dreams that once warned now reveal. The people who once drained now inspire. Even the air seems charged with silent intelligence, as if creation itself recognizes your alignment. You begin to understand that the psyche and the cosmos are mirrors, two sides of one mystery. I tell you, this is no metaphor. It is the truth discovered by those who have walked into their own depths and returned, bearing light. The empath's boundary is the philosopher's circle drawn around chaos, the alchemist's vessel, the mystic's prayer, the scientist's equation, all expressions of the same eternal law. Consciousness defines reality, and because you are consciousness, every act of awareness transforms the world. When the empath sets boundaries, the universe sighs in relief. The collective unconscious, long burdened by projections and confusion, feels one more soul returning home. And though you may think your act insignificant, it ripples through the psychic web, touching unseen hearts, inspiring unseen awakenings. For the psyche is one vast organism, and every healing within you contributes to the healing of the whole. Therefore, I say to you, do not fear your sensitivity, transmute it. Do not flee from your boundaries, sanctify them. Within the sacred tension of your own opposites lies the key to creation itself. Each time you remember who you are, not what others feel you to be, but who you are in the stillness behind, feeling the energy shifts instantly. The world rearranges around your consciousness. For the world is consciousness made visible, and perhaps in the silence after these words, you will feel it that subtle pulse in the air, that hush before revelation, the moment when your own soul recognizes itself in everything, there, at that threshold, the empath ceases to be merely human and becomes a participant in the eternal dance of the self. Boundaries dissolve into transparency. Individuality expands into universality. And yet, you remain a single note in the infinite symphony of being. So let us end where we began, not with conclusion, but with awareness. When the empath sets boundaries, energy shifts instantly, because the act of defining the self is the act of awakening God within. And in that awakening, the universe itself breathes a little deeper, for one more center of consciousness has remembered its divine rhythm. And that, my friends, is the mystery